Interns are like office paper, totem, cheap, replaceable, and meant to be stepped on, my manager, Corbett, sneered. I watched in a mix of fury and disbelief as he fed my 50-page technical proposal into the shredder. He didn't even glance at a single line of the work I had stayed up all night to finish. The machine whirred loudly, devouring months of my research and turning my bright ideas into thin strips of useless confetti. Corbett leaned in close, the heavy scent of expensive cigars and pure arrogance rolling off his expensive suit. He looked at me as if I were a bug he wanted to crush under his shoe. "Now go down to the basement and organize the archives," he barked, pointing toward the heavy door. "And don't you dare use the elevator. The stairs are good for low-level people like you. It builds character or whatever it is people like you need." I stood there, my heart thumping hard against my ribs. I felt the heat rising in my face, a physical reaction to the absolute injustice of the moment. To him, I was just a nameless girl in a plain intern outfit, someone he could bully for fun because he thought I had no power to fight back. Corbett turned his back to me, chuckling as he checked his gold watch. He thought he had successfully humiliated me and put me in my place. What he didn't notice was the tiny, high-definition camera lens embedded in my intern lanyard. It was a piece of high-tech equipment he didn't even know existed. As he walked away, every word he had just spoken and every mean action he had taken was being broadcast in real time to a secure cloud server. The recording was crystal clear, capturing his smirk and the sound of my work being destroyed. He thought he was the king, but he was actually just a man being watched. "My name is Lakin, and I am the founder and CEO of Ethosystems. My company is a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate that I built from the ground up with my own sweat and late nights. For the last 7 years, I have been the one making the big decisions that move the global market. However, I started hearing disturbing reports about a toxic culture in one of our regional offices. Top talent was leaving, and the numbers were dropping. I decided to see the truth for myself. I put on a wig, some fake glasses, and a plain outfit to pose as an intern named Totem. I wanted to know exactly what was happening when the boss wasn't looking. Within just a few hours of being in the office, I realized the situation was even worse than the rumors. Corbett was the manager I had hired to lead this team, but instead of leading, he was ruling with fear and cruelty. He treated everyone like they were beneath him. I sat at a tiny desk in the corner, taking notes on my phone while pretending to check my social media. I was documenting every single rule he broke and every person he mistreated. But there was something else I was watching closely. I am the person who designed the very software that our regional offices use to manage their accounts. It is a complex system that I know better than anyone in the world. As I sat there in my intern role, I noticed that Corbett was using a very specific backdoor in the code. He thought he was being clever, moving small amounts of money where they couldn't be tracked. He didn't realize that I had built a silent alarm into that part of the software. He was using my own invention to embezzle funds from my company. Following Corbett's orders, I headed to the basement archives. The air down there was freezing and damp, smelling of old paper and dust. It was a place where dreams went to die. As I started moving heavy boxes, I met a woman named Everly. She was a brilliant coder with sharp eyes, but she looked exhausted and defeated. She told me she had been stuck in this basement purgatory for 2 years. She wasn't here because she lacked talent. She was here because she had refused Corbett's personal advances. He had buried her career to punish her for saying no. "He thinks he's untouchable," Everly whispered, looking toward the door to make sure we were alone. "He sends anyone who challenges him down here to rot. Most people just quit, but I can't afford to leave yet." I looked at her, feeling a deep sense of guilt that one of my employees was being treated this way in my own building. I promised myself right then that I would make this right. Everly looked at me, seeing something in my eyes that didn't match my intern outfit. She decided to trust me, with a secret that would change everything. She led me to a dark corner behind a stack of broken filing cabinets. There, hidden under a tarp, was a server rack that wasn't supposed to be on our network. "Corbett forced me to set this up for him," she explained. "He's using the company's high-speed bandwidth and our secure servers to host illegal gambling sites. He makes more money from this than his actual salary." I looked at the glowing lights of the server, realizing the scale of his crimes. He wasn't just a bully and a thief. He was a criminal using my company as a shield. Day 2 began with a morning meeting for the regional board. I was tasked with bringing in the coffee and standing in the back of the room. Corbett stood at the front, looking smug in a new silk tie. He announced that he had developed a revolutionary new algorithm that would increase our processing speed by 40%. As he projected the code onto the screen, I recognized it immediately. It was the exact proposal he had shredded of mine the day before. He had fished the pieces out or saved a copy to claim it as his own. Brilliant invention. The board members were nodding in approval, impressed by his supposed genius. Corbett basked in the praise, acting as if he had spent months working on the complex math. I watched from the back, hidden behind the coffee urn. I had purposely left that version of the code, unfinished, as a trap. I knew that someone like Corbett wouldn't be able to spot the subtle flaws I had hidden in the logic. He was so eager to steal the credit that he didn't even check to see if the math actually worked. He was walking right into my trap. What Corbett didn't know was that the algorithm had a logic bomb hidden deep inside its lines. It was a tiny piece of code that would stay dormant until it reached a specific threshold of data. I had programmed it to crash the entire regional system if a specific, secret key wasn't entered by noon today. Since he didn't actually write the code, he had no idea the bomb was even there. He was presenting a weapon that was timed to explode in his own hands, and he was doing it with a smile on his face. As the morning went on, I started digging into how Corbett had stayed in power for so long despite his behavior. I used my admin access on my phone to look into the HR files. I found out that Corbett wasn't just a rogue manager. He was the brother-in-law of my company's CFO, Leland. Leland was a man I had trusted for years to handle our global finances. It turned out Leland had been shielding Corbett from every single HR complaint, deleting files, and threatening anyone who spoke up. They had turned this office into their own private kingdom. But the betrayal went even deeper than I ever expected. I looked into Leland's private connections and saw a name that made my breath catch in my throat. My own husband, Dorian, was Leland's regular golf partner. They spent every weekend together at an exclusive club. As I looked through their shared financial history, I saw that Dorian had been taking investment tips from Leland. These weren't tips. They were actually kickbacks and laundered money from Corbett's illegal gambling sites. My husband was profiting from the misery of my own employees. The realization felt like a cold stone in my chest. The people I was closest to were the ones trying to rot my company from the inside out. Dorian always complained that I was too obsessed with work, but now I knew why. He wanted me distracted so he could play his games with Leland and Corbett. He thought I was just a workaholic who didn't pay attention to anything else. They all thought I was blind, but as I sat at my intern desk, I realized I was the only one who truly saw the whole picture. Later that morning, Corbett decided to humiliate me again. He called me into his office and pointed to a specific artisan coffee shop 3 blocks away. "I want a triple shot latte, exactly 160 degrees, he demanded. "And don't even think about taking a cab, walk. It's good for your health." Just as I stepped outside, the clouds opened up and it started to pour. I walked the 3 blocks in a freezing rainstorm, getting drenched to the bone. By the time I got back with his coffee, my shoes were squelching and I was shivering. I handed him the drink, hopping to just go back to my desk and dry off. Corbett took a sip and immediately made a face of disgust. He walked over to a large potted plant in the corner and poured the entire expensive latte into the dirt. "It's 2 degrees too cold," he sneered. "You're useless at everything, Totem. Get out of my sight and go clean the break room." I stood there, water dripping off my hair and onto the carpet, but I didn't say a word. I just nodded and left his office. What Corbett didn't know was that I had used that coffee run to my advantage. While I was walking in the rain, I had actually stepped into a parked car around the corner. Inside was Imric, my head of global security. We had a quick, hushed meeting. I authorized him to perform a full, deep sweep of Leland's bank accounts and my husband's private holdings. I gave him the codes to bypass their personal firewalls. By the time I got back to the office with that cold coffee, Imric was already finding the evidence that would destroy them all. Noon arrived like a thunderclap. Just as the clock struck 12, the logic bomb in Corbett's stolen algorithm was triggered. All at once, the screens across the entire regional office turned a bright, angry red. The servers began to hum with a high-pitched whine before they went completely silent. The regional network had crashed, and every single client project was locked behind an encrypted wall. The office turned into a scene of pure chaos. People were shouting, phones were ringing off the hook, and the board members were panicking in the hallway. Corbett came running out of his office, his face turning a sickly shade of white. He was sweating through his expensive shirt, realizing that his revolutionary invention had just caused a total disaster. Instead of trying to fix it, he did what he always did. He looked for someone to blame. He spotted me near the break room and screamed at the top of his lungs. You stupid intern. You must have tripped over a wire in the server room." He yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me in front of everyone. "This is your fault. You've ruined everything." I didn't back down. I walked right up to him, looking him in the eye while everyone watched. "I can fix it," I said, my voice calm and steady. Corbett laughed, a high-pitched, desperate sound. You're a low-level girl who can't even get a coffee order right. How could you fix a system crash this big?" I didn't flinch. "I can fix it in 5 minutes," I repeated, "but only if you sign this document right now." I handed him a single sheet of paper. "It's a log admitting you supervised every line of the code's implementation. If you're the genius, you should have no problem signing for it." Corbett was desperate. He could hear the board members demanding answers behind him, and he knew his career was over if the system stayed down. He grabbed the pen from my hand and scribbled his name on the document without even reading the fine print. He shoved the paper back at me. "Fine, now fix it, or I'll have you arrested for sabotage." I walked over to the nearest terminal. My fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed that made the people around me gasp. I entered the secret key, and with 3 quick keystrokes, the red screens disappeared. The system rebooted perfectly. Every file was restored, and the network was faster than it had ever been. The board members, including 2 women named Ottilie and Eulalie, rushed over to the screens. They were amazed by how quickly the intern had saved the day. But Corbett, seeing that the danger had passed, immediately tried to take the credit back. He stepped in front of the monitor, pushing me aside. "See," he told the board, puffing out his chest. I knew my algorithm just needed a quick manual override. I was just testing the intern to see if she could handle a crisis. Ottilie and Eulalie looked at him with a mix of confusion and suspicion, but Corbett didn't care. He was already talking about his next promotion. What he didn't realize was that the document he had just signed wasn't a supervisor log at all. It was a formal, legal admission of intellectual property theft and a confession that he had knowingly implemented an unstable system. By signing that paper to save his skin, he had just handed me a signed confession that would hold up in any court of law. He thought the green screens meant he won, but they were actually the lights of his own trap. Corbett was furious that an intern had made him look bad, even if I had saved his job. As soon as the board members went back to their offices, he cornered me in the hallway. "You're done here, Totem," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "You showed me up in front of the board. You're fired. Get your things and be out of this building in 10 minutes. He then picked up his desk phone and called the HR director, a woman named Clarabelle. "Clarabelle, the intern Totem is being terminated for gross insubordination. Process the papers immediately." I knew Clarabelle was in Corbett's pocket because of his connection to Leland. She arrived a minute later, looking bored and holding a pink slip. She didn't even look at me as she held out the paper. "Corbett is the manager, and his word is final," she said in a flat voice. "You have no right to appeal." They both looked at me with smug expressions, waiting for me to cry or beg for my job. They thought they were clearing out a nuisance, but they were actually just giving me the perfect excuse to move to the next phase of my plan. "Are you sure you want to do that, Clarabelle?" I asked, pulling my phone from my pocket. I played a very specific recording from my cloud server. It was a conversation Corbett had yesterday while Clarabelle was out of the room. In the recording, Corbett called Clarabelle a clueless puppet and laughed about how easy she was to manipulate because she was too lazy to do actual HR work. Clarabelle's face went from bored to a ghostly shade of white. She looked at Corbett, who was suddenly speechless. The loyalty in their corrupt circle was starting to crumble. I didn't leave the building. Instead, I spent the afternoon preparing for the big event of the night, the regional office's 10-year anniversary gala. It was a black tie event where all the important people would be gathered. I arrived at the venue, but I wasn't wearing an evening gown. I had traded my intern outfit for a server's uniform. I was assigned to work the private VIP table where Corbett and Leland were sitting. They didn't even look at my face as I served them champagne. To them, a server was even more invisible than an intern. As I hovered nearby with a tray of appetizers, I kept my ears open. Corbett and Leland were deep in conversation, thinking the loud music and the crowd protected their secrets. I heard them discussing a plan to sell the company's core source code, the very heart of Ethos Systems, to a rival firm owned by a man named Hawk. Hawk is willing to pay $50 million for the architecture, Leland whispered, leaning in close. Once the transfer is done tonight, we'll blame the loss on a security breach caused by that intern we just fired. They were planning to commit the ultimate betrayal against the company that had made them rich. They thought they could walk away with a fortune while I took the fall for their crimes. I felt a wave of cold fury, but I kept my hands steady as I poured more wine. I was recording everything through a microphone hidden in my server's vest. I had the names, the amounts, and the timeline. They were planning to execute the transfer during the final toast of the night. They had no idea that their perfect plan was being heard by the person it was meant to destroy. As the gala continued, the betrayal hit even closer to home. I saw my husband, Dorian, walk over to the VIP table. He was laughing and joking with Corbett as if they were brothers. I moved closer, offering him a glass of champagne. He took the flute without even glancing at my face. "To the big move tonight," Dorian said, clinking glasses with Leland. "My wife is too busy with her corporate retreats in the mountains to notice the money we're moving. She thinks she's so smart, but she's just a workaholic who doesn't see what's right under her nose." Hearing my own husband mock me while he helped steal from me was a pain I can't even describe. I stood there, a silent server, holding a tray while the man I loved planned my downfall. Dorian continued, telling Corbett how he was looking forward to finally being the rich one in the relationship. He talked about how he deserved the money because he had to put up with my long hours. He had no idea that I wasn't in the mountains. He had no idea that I was the woman holding his drink, hearing every word of his greed and disrespect. Dorian thought I was in Switzerland for a tech summit, a lie I had told him to see what he would do while I was away. He was so confident that his plan was working that he started showing Corbett photos on his phone. He was bragging about a luxury resort he was planning to visit with a model named Fallen as soon as the deal with Hawk was finalized. He was using my company's money to plan a life with another woman. I felt the last bit of love I had for him turn into cold, hard ash. The time for observation was over. Day 3 began like any other morning at the office, but the air felt charged with electricity. Corbett was on top of the world, acting like he was already the king of the industry. He called a general assembly of all staff in the main lobby. He stood on a small stage, looking down at the hundreds of employees who worked for him. He announced that because of his brilliant algorithm, the regional office had been recognized by headquarters. He claimed he was being promoted to regional vice president, a title that didn't even exist yet in my company structure. "As my first act in this new role," Corbett shouted, his voice echoing through the lobby, "I am cleaning house. We have no room for incompetence or those who don't fit the vision of this office." He pointed toward me, standing at the edge of the crowd. "Tatum, you're officially being escorted out of this building. And you," he pointed to the basement door where Everly was standing, "the girl from the archives. You're both fired for gross incompetence and for trying to sabotage my work. Security, remove them both immediately." A few security guards stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. They knew Everly was a good worker and they had seen me fix the system, but they were afraid of Corbett. The crowd was silent, the atmosphere thick with fear and anger. Corbett was laughing now, a cruel, triumphant sound. He thought he had won. He thought he was finally getting rid of the only people who knew his secrets. He stood there with his arms crossed, waiting for us to be dragged out. He had no idea that the General Assembly was about to become his own public trial. Just as the security guards reached for my arm, the giant monitors behind Corbett began to flicker. He turned around, expecting to see his own face and his promotion slides. Instead, the screens began to play a video that made the entire lobby gasp. It was the footage from my lanyard camera. It showed Corbett shredding my proposal and saying that interns were meant to be stepped on. Then it switched to the footage from the rainstorm, showing him pouring the coffee into the plant while I stood there drenched and shivering. The crowd was dead silent. Corbett's face turned from triumphant to a sickly, pale green. He tried to shout for someone to turn off the monitors, but the controls were locked. The video continued, playing the audio from the gala where he and Leland discussed selling the source code to Hawk. The betrayal was being laid bare for everyone to see. Corbett was shaking now, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. He realized that the intern had been recording him the entire time. I didn't wait for him to speak. I walked through the crowd and onto the stage. I reached up and pulled off the wig and the fake glasses. I stood there in my $5,000 blazer that I had hidden under my intern coat. The transformation was complete. The people in the lobby who had seen me on the news recognized me instantly. A low murmur of "That's the CEO, that's Lakin" began to ripple through the room. I stood right in front of Corbett, who was now backed up against the screen, looking at me with pure terror. The room went completely silent as I took the microphone from the stand. I looked out at my employees, seeing the shock and then the hope on their faces. "My name is Lakin," I said, my voice projected clearly through the speakers. "And I am the owner of this building, the creator of the software you use, and the woman who signs your paychecks. I'm also the person whose chair you've been sitting in, Corbett." Corbett tried to sink into the background, but there was nowhere for him to go. He was exposed, in front of everyone he had bullied. I didn't fire him immediately. I wanted him to feel the weight of his actions. "I don't fire people without a fair hearing," I said, looking him in the eye. "So, Corbett, I'm going to give you a chance to save your job. I'm going to give you 60 minutes to audition for your position. All you have to do is stand here and explain to everyone why there is an illegal gambling server hidden in the basement archives. And while you're at it, explain why you were planning to sell our source code to Hawk tonight." Corbett's legs gave out and he slumped onto the stage floor. He looked pathetic, a shell of the man who had been mocking me just minutes ago. He started to stammer, trying to blame Leland or the intern, but no one was listening anymore. He realized that the low-level girl was actually the most powerful person in the room. I looked at my watch. "Your 60 minutes starts now, Corbett. I suggest you start talking because the authorities are already on their way." I walked to the edge of the stage, leaving him there to face the people he had tormented. Just as I stepped off the stage, Leland, the CFO, tried to push through the crowd. He was sweating and looking around wildly, realizing his own world was collapsing. He tried to reach me, his face a mask of fake concern. "Lakin, this is all a huge misunderstanding," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Corbett is unstable. I had no idea what he was doing. I was just trying to protect the company from his mistakes. Please, let's go to a private room and talk this through. We can fix this together." I didn't even stop walking. I just looked at Rick, who was standing by the entrance with a team of federal agents. "Leland, I've already seen the wire transfer records," I said. "I know about the offshore accounts and the money you've been laundering for Corbett. I also know about your plan with Hawk." Leland froze as the agent stepped forward. He tried to run toward the back exit, but he was blocked by 2 more agents. He was handcuffed right there in the middle of the office lobby, in front of the employees he had helped exploit for years. The sight of the CFO being led away in handcuffs sent a shockwave through the room. The untouchable leaders were being taken down one by one. I stood there, watching as the corruption I had discovered was finally being cleared out. Leland was shouting about his rights, but no one was listening. He had traded his integrity for a few $1,000,000, and now he was paying the price. I looked at Corbett, still shivering on the stage, and realized that the family kingdom they had built was officially over. As the agents were leading Leland away, my husband, Dorian, appeared at the back of the crowd. He had heard the news and rushed to the office, thinking he could still save the situation. He saw me on the stage and his face turned into a mask of pure shock. He pushed through the crowd and tried to hug me, his voice full of fake relief. "Lakin, thank God you're okay. I heard there was a crisis. I was so worried about you. I had no idea these people were so corrupt. I was just trying to stay close to them, to find the truth for you." I stepped back, the disgust I felt for him showing clearly on my face. "The Swiss summit was a lie, Dorian," I said, my voice cold. I was right here the whole time. I was the server who held your champagne flute while you talked about how boring I am. I heard every word you said to Corbett and Leland about the money and the model you were planning to run away with." Dorian's face went pale, and he started to stammer, trying to find a new lie to tell me. "I was infiltrating the ring to protect you," he cried, reaching for my hand. I pulled out my phone and showed him a series of photos Imric had just sent me. They were photos of him and Fallen at a luxury resort, drinking expensive wine paid for by the kickbacks from Corbett's gambling sites. "You weren't infiltrating anything, Dorian. You were participating. You sold out your wife and my company for a life of luxury with another woman. You're done." I turned my back on him as the security guards escorted him out of the building. I looked toward the basement door and saw Everly standing there, her eyes wide with shock. I signaled for her to come up to the stage. She walked through the crowd, and for the first time in years, people were stepping aside to let her through with respect. She stood beside me, looking at the monitors and then at me. "My name is Lakin," I repeated for her, "and I am so sorry for what happened to you in this building. You are one of the most brilliant coders I have ever met, and your talent was wasted in those archives." In front of the entire office, I made an announcement that brought the room to its feet. "As of this moment, Everly is being promoted to Regional Vice President of Operations. Her first task will be to personally oversee the permanent removal of Corbett from this building. She will also be in charge of a full audit of every department to ensure that no one else is being mistreated." Everly looked at me, tears streaming down her face, and then she looked at Corbett. The basement girl was now his boss, and justice was finally being served. Everly stepped toward Corbett, her posture straight and her voice firm. "Corbett, you have 10 minutes to clear out your desk," she said, "and you will be leaving through the basement stairs. It builds character, remember." The crowd erupted in cheers as Corbett was led away by security. He had tried to bury Everly's career, but in the end, she was the one who was rising while he was falling. I watched them go, knowing that I had finally found the leader this office truly deserved. The humiliation of Corbett wasn't over yet. As he was being led away, I made sure he had to follow his own rules one last time. I had the security guards bring up the heavy archives boxes that he had forced me to move in the basement. I told him he had to carry them all down the stairs himself before he was allowed to leave the building for good. He was sweating and panting, his expensive suit ruined by the dust of the basement he had created. Everyone in the lobby watched as the man who thought he was high-level was forced to do the heavy lifting. "Wait, my personal files are in there," Corbett shouted, trying to open one of the boxes. I walked over and tapped the lid. "I've already cleared out your personal files, Corbett. I thought you might want something to remember your time here." As he struggled with the heavy boxes on the stairs, one of the lids popped open. Instead of his files or his awards, hundreds of strips of paper spilled out. I had replaced his belongings with the shredded remains of my proposal that he had destroyed on day one. He stood on the stairs, surrounded by the confetti of the work he had mocked. It was the ultimate walk of shame. He had tried to turn my hard work into trash, and now he was literally carrying that trash out of the building. I watched as he finally reached the bottom and was escorted out into the rain, the same rain he had forced me to walk in for his coffee. He had no job, no reputation, and no future in the tech world. He was finally seeing what it felt like to be cheap and replaceable. The fallout didn't stop at the office doors. Hawk, the rival CEO who had been planning to buy the stolen source code, realized the deal was dead as soon as Leland was arrested. He tried to call me, acting as if he were an innocent bystander who had been tricked by Leland. When I didn't answer, he sent a series of threatening emails. He claimed he had stolen data that Leland had given him months ago, and he threatened to leak it to the press if I didn't pay him $50 million to stay quiet. I knew exactly what data he was talking about. I had been aware of a small leak in the regional server months ago, but I hadn't plugged it immediately. Instead, I had replaced the real data with a honeypot, a set of fake files that looked incredibly valuable but were actually a trap. I had planted them knowing that someone like Leland would eventually try to sell them. Hawk thought he had the keys to my empire, but he was actually holding a digital grenade. He was trying to blackmail the person who had designed the trap he was already in. I sent a single reply to Hawk's email. "Go ahead and open the files, Hawk. I think you'll find the results very interesting." Seconds later, Emric confirmed that Hawk had tried to access the encrypted data. The moment he did, a sophisticated virus I had written myself was triggered. It didn't just delete the fake files, it backtraced into Hawk's own company network and locked every single one of his servers. He was now the one being held for ransom by his own greed. His company was paralyzed, and he had no one to blame but himself. A few hours later, I was back in the now quiet office. Most of the employees had gone home, but a few were still there, helping Everly organize the new structure. I sat at my old intern desk one last time. Dorian walked into the room looking like he had been through a war. He tried to sit in the chair next to me, his voice a low, desperate whisper. "Lakin, please, we can talk about this at home. I made a mistake, but we've been together for 10 years. You can't just throw away our marriage over a few golf games." I didn't even look at him. I simply handed him a thick blue folder I had been keeping in my bag. He opened it, expecting to see a second chance. Instead, he saw a fast-track divorce filing that my lawyers had prepared in record time. "I've also filed a freeze order on every one of your bank accounts and the deed to the house," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Since you used marital assets to fund your investments with Leland, you forfeited your right to them under our prenuptial agreement." Dorian looked at the papers and then at me, realizing for the first time that I wasn't just his wife. I was his boss, and I was finished with him. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I have nothing." I looked at him, seeing the stranger he had become. "You have the clothes on your back and the tips Leland gave you. Maybe Fallon has a spare room at her resort." I stood up and walked away, leaving him alone at the tiny intern desk. He had tried to make me feel small, but in the end, he was the one who was left with nothing. The next morning, I began the process of completely rebuilding the office culture. The first thing I did was fire Clarabelle and the entire HR team that had helped Corbett hide his crimes. They were let out of the building in the same way Corbett had been. I didn't just fire them. I made sure the reasons for their termination were recorded in their permanent industry files. I wanted to make sure they could never work in human resources again. They had betrayed the very people they were supposed to protect, and I had zero tolerance for that kind of rot. I replaced Clarabelle with Dakota and Kinsley. They were two brilliant young women who had worked in this office 2 years ago. They had been the original whistleblowers who tried to report Corbett's behavior to headquarters. Leland had fired them for making false accusations, and they had struggled to find work ever since. When I called them and offered them the chance to run the HR department, they were in tears. They knew the office better than anyone, and they were the perfect people to ensure that everyone was treated with dignity and respect. To show the employees that I was serious about making things right, I made one more announcement. I authorized a $50,000 bonus for every single employee who could provide evidence that they had been mistreated, passed over for promotion, or unfairly docked pay during Corbett's time as manager. I wanted to pay back the toxic tax they had been forced to pay with their mental health and their careers. The atmosphere in the office shifted instantly from fear to a deep, profound sense of relief. We were finally becoming the company I had always wanted us to be. Corbett, now desperate and out of money, tried to make one last move to save his reputation. He contacted a local news station and claimed that I was a corporate tyrant who had used illegal spying and entrapment to ruin him. He tried to act as if he were the victim of a crazy billionaire who liked to play games with people's lives. He even held a small press conference on the sidewalk in front of the building, hoping to stir up a scandal and maybe get a settlement out of me. He thought he could use the media to bully me one last time. But I was already 10 steps ahead of him. I didn't even have to release a statement. The press conference was suddenly crashed by 2 men named Lowell and Rafferty. They were former interns from 5 years ago whom Corbett had physically assaulted during a training session. He had paid them off to stay quiet, but their NDAs were now void because of his criminal investigation. They stood in front of the cameras and showed the medical reports from the injuries Corbett had caused them. They told the world exactly what kind of man he really was. Corbett tried to run away from the cameras, but he was surrounded by reporters asking about the basement purgatory and the illegal gambling sites. The video of his press conference went viral for all the wrong reasons. He had tried to paint me as the villain, but he only succeeded in reminding the world of his own cruelty. He was now a social pariah, and the authorities added the assault charges to his already long list of crimes. He had finally run out of lies, and the truth was a weight he couldn't carry. While the legal cases against Corbett, Leland, and Dorian were moving forward, I authorized a final, deep audit of the regional office's finances. I wanted to make sure every penny was accounted for. During the audit, we discovered something that made even my experienced team gasp. Corbett hadn't just been embezzling from the company's accounts. He had been systematically stealing from the employee pension fund for years. He had taken over $2 million that was meant for the retirements of the people who worked for him. The news was devastating to the staff. People who had worked for Etha Systems for decades were suddenly looking at a future with no security. I saw the fear in their eyes as they gathered in the break room, talking about how they would pay their mortgages or retire. I knew I couldn't let this stand. This wasn't just a financial loss. It was a betrayal of the promise I made to every person who joined my company. I decided to take a radical step that shocked even my board of directors at headquarters. I announced that I would be personally covering the entire $2 million gap in the pension fund out of my own private dividends. I wasn't using company money. I was using my own wealth to make them whole. I stood in the lobby and told them that their futures were safe. "You worked for me, and I will always work for you," I said. The employees didn't just cheer, they lined up to shake my hand. I had gone into the office as an intern to find a bully, but I had ended up becoming a hero to the people I had almost lost. On my last day at the regional office, I decided to spend a few minutes alone in Corbett's old executive suite. It was a massive, cold room filled with expensive furniture that had been bought with stolen money. Everly had already started to move in, but she had left the desk clear for me. As I sat at the mahogany desk, I found a small, leather-bound notebook in a hidden drawer. It was Corbett's private journal. I opened it and saw a letter he had written to himself on the day he was promoted to manager. The letter was a list of ways he planned to eventually own the CEO. He wrote about how he would make himself so indispensable that I would have to give him whatever he wanted. He talked about how he would use the regional office to build his own empire and eventually take my place. It was a testament to his massive ego and his total lack of talent. He thought he could win through fear and manipulation, never realizing that true power comes from the loyalty and respect of the people you lead. He had a plan for everything except being caught. I didn't throw the letter away. I had it framed and hung it on the wall in the employee break room. I added a small plaque at the bottom, a reminder that ego is not talent. I wanted it to stay there as a permanent lesson for anyone who ever thought they could climb the ladder by stepping on others. It became a symbol of the old regime's failure and the new office's strength. I sat at that desk one last time, looking at the city's skyline, and felt a sense of closure. The intern had finished her job. I stood in the lobby with Everly, looking at a thriving, happy office. The basement purgatory had been turned into a high-tech lab for new coders. The archives were now digital, managed by a team that actually enjoyed their work. The air in the building felt light and full of energy. I saw a new batch of interns arriving for their first day. They looked nervous and excited, just like I had pretended to be 3 days ago. I walked over to them, and they looked at me with wide eyes, recognizing the CEO they had only seen on the news. "Welcome to Etha Systems," I said with a warm smile. "My name is Lakin. I want you to know something before you start. I was your fellow intern 3 days ago. I sat where you sit and I saw what you see. Today I am your boss, but never forget that tomorrow one of you might be mine. In this company, we value the person, not the title. If you work hard and treat each other with respect, there is no limit to what you can achieve here." The interns nodded, their faces filled with a new kind of determination. I walked toward the exit, my head held high. I looked back one last time and saw the shredder in the corner of the lobby. It was whirring loudly as Everly fed a final document into it. It was Corbett's final, canceled paycheck. The sound of the machine was no longer a threat. It was a celebration of a new culture where everyone was valued. I stepped out into the sunshine, no longer a workaholic who didn't see the truth, but a leader who had found her way back to the heart of her company.